what would I do to solve this? It's starting with the listening. What's going to be right for your organization?
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. I'm your host, Ryan Willard, and today I had a really great conversation with Karl Feldman, who is a partner at Hinge. Hinge are an organization, a marketing consultancy. They've done a lot of extraordinary research in the AEC industry, and Karl actually oversees the company's service delivery. He's got a background as being an entrepreneur, a marketeer, and an engineer. He's in a very unique position and uniquely qualified to be able to lead Hinge's accounts team. He himself is continuing to evolve and improve the value that Hinge deliver to their clients. In addition, he advises business owners and practice leaders in architecture, engineering, construction on growth trends and marketing issues, of which we discuss a lot about today. So some of the research that Hinge has produced their high growth studies are always very fascinating. And in this conversation, we actually look at quite a controversial topic in many ways, because we look at some of the real reasons for why practices find it hard to hire. And we look at the cultural factors for some of the reasons why staff might be exiting. We actually question the exodus of talent. What has actually happened? Or have they really gone? Have they disappeared? And we start to discover, according to some of the research, that they haven't all just left the industry, as is often kind of the headlines read. We have these headlines, these captivating and compelling headlines of quiet quitting and the great resignation. Whilst there's some truth in that, it doesn't tell us the whole nuanced reality of it. And what Karl starts to point towards is that many of that mid-tier professionals, they have been going to either there's a small amount of businesses that are run really well and are paying well and have got their mission focused and their finance focused and their marketing focused and their sales process focused, and the business works and they're able to attract and retain talent far, far easier than those businesses that are not able to do that. We also look at other industries that are on the periphery of architecture that often utilize and need architectural services or skill sets, and how in many cases that they are more financially buoyant, they've got more market intelligence, and that they are pulling out some of the talent into these areas and domains as well. So we look at that, we look at the cultural factors, we look at the generational leadership divide. So when you've got more senior members of team and their way of leading, which doesn't always land well for the younger members of the team. So we probe into a little bit of that. We talk about feelings of mistrust and how that actually gets created. We talk about kind of misunderstandings between generational gap, and we talk about the importance of listening to your team. So fascinating conversation here. Thoroughly enjoyed it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Karl Feldman. This episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, Business of Architecture's flagship program to help you structure your firm for freedom, fulfillment, and financial profit. If you want access for our free training on how to do this, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. Or if you want to speak directly to one of our advisors about how we might be able to help you, please follow the link in the information. Karl, welcome to the Business of Architecture. How have you been?
Been great. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Now, you are a professional services marketing firm. You work at Hinge. You guys are very well known for your cutting edge industry reports and the research that you guys do. You offer an enormous amount of insight into the AEC world, trends that are emerging, and you really play a very pivotal role in helping to navigate AEC organizations and firms, around these difficult trends, or helping them grow through marketing collateral and communications. And I know that recently we were talking about one of the high growth studies that you've recently completed at Hinge. So maybe we'll start there with the first question of how would you describe what it is that you do, and what are some of the emerging trends that you've seen already in 2023?
That's a really interesting time. I'll start with that. I was actually just reflecting on, we're getting ready to launch the new annual study. So I was looking back Our high growth study for the AEC industry actually tracks back almost 15 years now. So
Hmm.
it's quite interesting to look at how things have changed and really with the eye towards where are things going, right? I think we've all kind of lived through a pandemic bubble, all of the changes that have happened. One thing that has been consistent is the lack of talent constraint.
Hmm.
That has ebbed and flowed a little bit, but stayed right at the top of concern for AEC firms. So that is very consistent, but at the same time, I think we're heading into a lot of reinforcing trends that change the shape of that. So the overall trend, the constraint of finding top talent, and especially that mid-career leadership, that continues to be a real push. But the shape of what that trend looks like and where some firms are having a very different experience, that
Yeah.
that has changed dramatically in the last 3, 4 years.
So this is quite interesting because when I talk to practices, over the sort of COVID period and where we're at today, there is this talk of the great resignation, of this exodus of talent. Where have they gone? Mid-tier architectural professionals have become very, very difficult to find, and it's meant that the hiring processes of firms have got to be, they've really got to be on the ball here and being able to market well to attract and retain talent. Is it real? Has the talent disappeared? Have they left and gone into other industries, or what, from your perspective, do you see the trend as being?
Yeah, I have some bias, right? Being in the branding, marketing, research world, I know a good headline when I hear one. The Great
Yeah,
Resignation, quiet resignation, loud resignation. All this is
the
great.
quiet quitting.
Yeah, yeah, quiet thriving.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. But I think that underneath all of that, there is an AENC. Architecture has a little different shape, engineering a little different shape. What happens in, design build a little different. But I think across the board there is a little bit of, I would call it self-deprecation, right? We think that we may be a
Hmm.
little less valuable, or that people are less interested in our profession overall. But when you step back from our industry, I mean, I could not find in recent history another time where our profession, design, build, architecture, design, especially national infrastructure, has been in mass media like 60 Minutes recently. So,
Mm.
when something comes up on it, I consume a lot of information, right? Just kind of keeping tabs on things. But when certain elements that are very specialized in our industry break into the national or international conversation, that changes some things, right? But I think when we look kind of more insulated into our industry, there's this kind of feeling of, well, how can we compete with big tech, right? How can we look at this? It's
Yeah.
a brain drain, or there's not enough kids getting into our industry. And some of that is true. There's never, it's not black and white. There could be more. There's more outreach, some of these things, or, we feel like, oh gosh, it's not a great place to work, like the work-life balance. We work hard. Um, if
Sure.
you were to be inside some of these tech firms, and we have the, I guess, luxury or perspective of working across AEC, technology consultant, management consulting, even very large firms. Yeah, it's not a bowl of cherries over there either. I mean, there's a reason that folks get into these tech firms, and as soon as their stocks vest, they're out of there and looking for something else, sometimes back into art industries. So
Yes.
I think another way to say
Well,
this is,
that's a very.
yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say that's actually a very interesting observation because I've met recently, a number of people who have been in the high-paying tech world themselves who have left and moved actually into a career in architecture.
That's right. That's right. I mean, we sell ourselves a little short in places, and I use myself as an example. I studied computer science. I started in B2C. I started in .com. I think the world disruption
Hmm.
from technology that we're going through right now is bigger than the .com commercial boom, but people are just kind of figuring out what kind of impact that's had on our lives, both in industry and as consumers and just as people. Um, but that is transformational, I think, to the way we work, the way that what we're going to need from talent. It's shifting, and I think one thing that is another trend that I've seen in our study, and I think anybody listening to this in the industry, you felt it in some way or another. Generational divide. There is a lot of succession
Yes.
planning that's right up there, um, and that is connected to the additional churn with mergers and acquisitions, and kind of consolidation into many of these cross-functional organizations. Right? It's not just architecture; it's A&E, it's AE and C, all of these different things, and even specialized consulting in that. In some ways, Hinge fits that bill, right? I mean, we're coming in and doing everything from market demand studies to brand perception and even, team experience. We're talking about the high growth study and kind of our big primary benchmarking studies, but we're doing an awful lot of very specific. What do we look like as an employer brand, right? Well, how do we change that and think about marketing to recruits and retaining our people as well as we look for new business.
Hmm.
I think the challenge has been funding more than anything else. It's like if you look at it from the outside, everyone agrees what a big constraint talent is, but very few have dedicated the effort, the budget to change that. And I'll say it's a
Hmm.
small percentage, but in those high growth firms, the ones that have a completely different experience. They are
Hmm.
they're being selective with who's joining their team, right? And that sounds crazy to most of us living through that, but
Yeah.
the same kind of strategic understanding that you would apply to getting the right kind of business in the first place, building your backlog. If you apply that to talent, you can have a similar outcome. That's logical when you say it, but
Hmm.
it's kind of a leap of faith to get there too. And I
So,
think, yeah, you've got a lot of people involved within organizations to make that call.
what are these firms doing then? Are they just better at positioning and marketing themselves to attract talent? Are they much more cognizant of what is the underlying motivations for certainly like younger team members?
Hmm.
I hear so much conflict with work from home and
Oh yeah,
yeah, I mean, work from home is the big one that's on my mind. Just having spoken about it with, numerous practice owners where it's not working for them, and then the team members feel very much entitled for it, and there is a very different sort of generational
sure.
perspective on
Sure.
this, where people who are in their sort of mid 50s, 60s who run a practice, well, they didn't think of anything of traveling 2.5 hours there and back to an office,
The bad
whereas
old days.
younger team members, yeah, younger team members are like, no way, I don't want to travel 30 minutes to
Yeah.
get into work. It doesn't work.
You know what, Ryan? It's interesting. I'll share a little bit from the study here that may sound counterintuitive or even controversial, but younger audiences we're
Mhm.
finding are actually hungry for in-person collaboration in our industry. There are quite a few
Really?
of folks, yeah, the folks coming in when we're doing these specific studies around employer brand and the onboarding experience, and we're looking at different segments and cohorts of tenure. So like 1 to 3 years at a firm,
Mhm.
4 to 5, et cetera, and on. Those early recruits, they want more in-person interaction because it's part of their onboarding. They have
Mhm.
a need for social integration as much as learning to practice and these things. And it's, if you think of some of the, I mean, it's every generation, right? You have, oh, there's young kids. It's, hey, get off my lawn. There's always this back and forth, but there isn't, I think maybe driven with technology or just how kids are growing up now. I got a 12-year-old. I can see it. they want instant feedback for
Yeah.
things. They're growing up in this world where the data is all around them. They have access to it, and they want the same from, their profession. And you can get a lot of that remote, but they also want to meet their peers. They want to meet their mentors. They crave these in-person, whether it's events. And I'm not saying it's all back in the office, you're in a cube and, these types of things, but having
Sure.
the right balance of events, of places where people get together, whether that's social, work, training, onboarding. I think that's one of the things when I was alluding to the shape of this changing, that's a big change. And the
Yeah.
pandemic, it didn't so much create these trends, it accelerated them very quickly. Yeah, I used to work at Herman Miller, a home office, commercial office, and was actually on the other side helping them develop online for, now it looks really smart, B2C. Before the DWR
Yeah.
acquisition, it was testing and a focus group and research and all kinds of things to get into the home office space where competitors were doubling down on commercial. So lots of still interesting research with friends I keep in touch with there. The pendulum is swinging, right? But it's the consistent trend of more home office flexibility and the realization that you now have to maintain continuity across different workspaces. So that geographic independence applies to personal workspace, applies to how you're interacting with colleagues. That's part of the haves and have-nots of firms that are really balancing as well. It's an investment not only in attracting the right kind of talent, but also giving them what they need in terms of like social
Yeah.
technology, interactions, communication. Our work is so connected and technical, right? That these things should balance the in-person and digital twins or what have you. All of these things, it's moving at a lightning pace. And now you throw in like, the AI co-pilots here, that adds a whole nother dimension.
Yeah.
As your team able to work with these kinds of tools, there's no question that's happening. Does your firm have the cross-functional team to use it responsibly? I've heard a lot of things that, I'm getting white hair just hearing like how things are being deployed in some places. But I think younger generations are going to be more adept, more comfortable with it. But it's quickly going to change the way that we work, both in our discipline and in communications.
So what kind of things would you be advising to a company that might be, say, struggling with work from home policies, or perhaps they? I mean, I'm very encouraged to hear that that actually from the data that younger people are hungry for in-person communication, because I really think that that's it's very difficult to mature as a professional if you're not inside of a office environment which is collaborative and there's organic communication happening, and you're able to step into your own leadership and actually managing and dealing with people. That's very difficult to. You can synthesize it digitally, but
It's hard.
the actual
Yeah.
physical the physical aspect of it is special.
Yeah. Yeah. It
There's a
takes
lot. There's a lot that
infrastructure.
happens just by being in a space.
Yeah. Yeah. It does take infrastructure, and it's, you listen to the conversations out there. It's not the same, right? It's not, on one end of the spectrum, you have leadership kind of mistrusting talent and saying you need to be back in the office. Productivity is suffering. I can't see you. We're missing out on collaboration.
Yeah.
And to some extent, it's true, and it's different depending on the type of work. Creative and technical creative professions like ours, there are certainly things that are just richer, a better experience in person. And we have to acknowledge, and this falls into some of that generational divide, it looks different. That craving of in-person interaction, that doesn't mean that we're required to be in the office, 5 days a week, 4 days a week, what have you. That flexibility is key. Having purpose to the collaborations is key. To go to your question of, what would I advise? Number one is listen to your team. Think about your organization and how you work, Starting with an objective understanding is the first step to coming up with a achievable and sustainable strategy for that. It's and every organization's a little bit different. Hinge, we have a global client base. It's been, 12 years remote. I mean, we were kind of on a leading edge of that where, many agencies, you fly, you're there, you're in person, what have you. We found even folks that we were working with, right across the street said, can we just have a call? Can we do this? And video conference was richer, having uh, online collaborative whiteboards and things, and those different collaborative tools is a richer experience helping to balance these things. There's still no replacement for in person. Pandemic, we look at the bubble coming out. I'll just say personally, I am so tired of being on planes. Last week, it was just an awful experience. I just, hundreds of planes grounded. We've got climate change going on. There's more storms, unpredictable, what have you. Summer travel is always tough. Makes you appreciate these kinds of hybrid things. And still, coming out of that kind of lack of person to person communication, I've had more keynotes, more board meetings, more meetings where, teams are saying, Karl, it's so good to see you. And you have legs. I forgot. That's great. It's, there's no replacement for that. And just, that person to person bonding, but it's what's the right place for that. So go back. I think listen first, what's right for your organization, and think about the different cohorts, right? It's onboarding versus what is your mid career talent need versus what is your, more senior leadership need. It's often different, and you have to have something that is relevant for each and valuable, and then find those connection points.
Yeah. It's interesting there, actually, the kind of observation perhaps of team leaders or practice owners, and they're equating like a drop in productivity or a drop in performance with work from home.
Mm-hmm.
And the two might not actually be connected.
Might not. Right. Right. Yeah, I'd
And
say
it becomes quite interesting.
yeah, a lot of it. It's one of the things that it's a pro and con, right? The work we do, it's professional services that we're researching, and people are illogical. So a lot of times there's feelings in this too, the feeling of mistrust, but that mistrust may be of work style or technology, maybe not specifically your team, right? Is one interesting stat. This was not a Hinge study; it was a global study, and I forget the tech giant that funded this, but it was, looking at the amount of in-office surveillance tools. So being able, Big Brother, like to see, are people,
Yes.
active at their desktop or what have you, and then the corresponding cat and mouse of I've got a mouse jiggler app or something. That used to be somewhere in the order of, 40, 30 something, 40%. Now it's north of 80. So I think that in itself, that was eye opening to me. That just the mistrust and disconnect, and I think that's probably if I were to give advice, that's the place to focus on productivity is trust, right? Does your firm have trust in the work getting done, the collaboration needing to happen, and that communication happening? That's outside of tech. That's outside of remote or in office. But I think a lot of teams are kind of missing that. And then you get to, what do you do about that? How do you build, a research instrument to listen and understand? And then how do you act on that? Good lesson in the pandemic of, even if you don't have the answer, communicating and being transparent with your teams, that builds trust. That builds, that retention and loyalty that we're all looking for, because who wants to be left in the dark? Not me.
Yeah. Well, this is very, very important, and kind of goes to a very much deeper issue here, which is, how do practice owners, how do employees nurture a culture of trust when there was all this kind of misunderstanding? And that's you're absolutely right that it's the team owners business owners end up mistrusting their own teams. There's a kind of paranoia that can kind of develop. Some of it's founded,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have these kind of stories of, oh well, the teams they're off, they're doing their laundry, they're not focusing when they're at home. I have no idea to see what it is that they're doing. It's all part and part of a world
Yeah.
of mistrust. And
Yep.
then obviously, what's the experience like for the employee when they are being mistrusted in working from home?
It can
And
self-reinforce, can
then
it?
what's the
Yeah.
clarity?
Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah,
send signals of mistrust, you'll get mistrust in kind. You'll get it back. So I think it
yeah,
really, I'll go back to that core of listening is number one, but
hmm
lesson coming out of the pandemic disruption. I mean, I got a lot of personal lessons myself, family and professional life.
hmm
Those boxes are just illusions in a lot of cases, but um,
yeah,
you think about a balance here. On one hand, I think what you're saying is spot on, Ryan. There is some reality to productivity fall off and distractions at home. You care about your home. You may have family around that,
hmm
whether they're, like those YouTubes where the kids popping in and going crazy or not, you're still, some part of your brain is thinking of them. It's different. Um, but being able to have that conversation and come up with tools to achieve collective goals, I would say that that's the key. On the other side of it, there is a certain discipline that leadership needs to have to pay attention to performance. And I think we're seeing that in the
yeah,
market as well. Um, the focus on attribution and performance is key. I mean, I'll say from our perspective, that's a really good thing for us because we're very focused on that. We've always been an advocate
hmm
of don't spend on marketing, recruiting, what have you, until you have success measures in place. Uh, but I think that
yeah,
same thing applies to talent as well. You have the soft and personal, whole person side of, are we listening to one another? Are we building trust? Are we sharing what we can with one another, especially in times of uncertainty? It's how can you shorten that decision and communication loop because you can't see as far
hmm
ahead. And whether teams are voicing that or not, they're thinking that, they're responding that way. So shortening that loop and being more open with things, even if you don't have the answer, that's a hard thing. It's a harder to do than say for leadership because it's a leap of faith, right? I think there's this notion of leadership has to know, right? Having a strong vision,
hmm
that's important, but having a strong vision, it's not always compatible with having all the answers. So being able to say, this is our vision,
yeah,
this is our path, here are the things we're not sure about, but here's what we're doing about it. That builds confidence, it builds trust, it builds openness. And, if things need to be adjusted, at least everyone's along for the ride. That goes a long way and it helps
sure.
to build that trust and we're all rowing together kind of mentality. I think especially in smaller growing practices, that's even more hands-on.
So success measures are something that actually are going to be born out of good communication between
Absolutely.
employee and director, and actually should be a continued conversation.
Yeah.
And really, this question of like, there's been a drop in productivity is actually quite nebulous because people aren't even measuring it in the first place.
Right. Right. And I'm a little biased here because the tools and the data, on the one hand, it's scary and it's uncertain. It's going to change the way we work. There's also a huge amount of promise there, right? If there are ways to do what we do and use our skills and expertise more efficiently, if we have machines
hmm
to help us like any other technology, right? It's just another revolution here, that I've actually just co-authored a book that we launched with my other managing partners around visible expertise, visibility of expertise. It's more crucial now than ever, right? When you have this, think of the mistrust of talent and inside an organization. Well, that extends outside too. I mean, you have LinkedIn used to be a great place to like kind of network and ask questions and things. And now there's so much noise, a lot of it automated, bots and things that you have to stand out from that. So I think that same kind of genuine connection, it's important inside of firms. It's also important how you go outside, whether you're speaking to potential recruits and talent, you're speaking to potential new clients. Having that kind of genuine connection and trust is, on one hand, more challenging. On another hand, we see it paying off in a big way. So
Yes.
lessons learned at home can be taken onto the road, I guess is what I'm saying. And building a system, starting with listening and building a system to address your specific audiences, both internal and external, that's where we as people have a lot of opportunity, even as this kind of uncertain mechanics of how we're working with these automated tools and things.
So, what are your thoughts on what we might call geo arbitrage? So, this is businesses starting to actually look internationally for team members, and certainly I've started to see a trend where you've got companies hiring people abroad. This usually works quite well, where we've seen somebody, let's say they're from Latin America and their country of origin is somewhere there. They've come to the US, they've set up a business, and they've got lots of connections and family and friends back in Latin America. And they set up a kind of satellite office, if you like, where they're effectively outsourcing a lot of work to these other teams. They can take advantage of the difference in pay expectations and living costs comparatively from, it's a lot cheaper to live somewhere in Latin America than it is in California, for example. And it actually opens up a whole new world of talent. And we're starting to see these kind of very interesting hybrid businesses where you've got opportunities emerging all over for both employees and for team members.
Absolutely. I think it's a big topic. On one hand, you have this kind of traditional view of, outsourcing and going international as it's kind of commodity or low cost saving measures, those types of things. And I think that's still part reality. And I think it's shifting.
Yeah.
I think it's shifting a lot too. I'll tie it back to our discussion with talent in a moment too, but I think there's a lot more opportunity with technology and geographically independent work. We've seen and worked with firms that take advantage of different time zones for work. I mean, they're basically going 24/7 because we have teams kind of spread out around the world. I think the notion of that cost savings element, I think you described it as, the different, pay scales and costs of living. That's one factor, but it's not always, that may not even be the main value in some cases. I think it's also, and this is new, it's actually something that we'll be asking more about in our upcoming studies, but I think for some firms that are kind of on the leading edge of building some of these flexible work styles and hybrid infrastructure, there's also the opportunity for teams that were US based to be, relocating in other areas with very little disruption or great benefit to them within the same type of work style. We ourselves, we've had some folks that they used to be very local. We're actually based our office. I'm in Washington, D.C. Our office is in Reston, Virginia, right outside we food truck with the Society for Civil Engineers, American Society for Civil Engineers is like this little area there. And we have folks that they grew up with us in the area in Virginia, and some have relocated other sides of the country, better cost of living, better work-life balance, and in some cases, better proximity to some of our client base. So it allows some in-person flexibility there. we have some folks that have moved completely out of the country. We have one marketing team that is actually very involved in podcasts, webinars, and things, and he's in Brazil now. No disruption to the work, better work-life balance
Hmm.
for his family. Those types of things, I think we can expect that to become more and more common. As we get more comfortable with the hybrid workspace. It doesn't need to contradict the in-person piece either. I mean, we have lots of teams that we've worked with in AEC and other verticals that they have, quarterly get-togethers. People actually come in. Some of the cost savings from, larger physical office space may shift to travel for certain time periods.
Yep.
Can be more flexible. That's going to be an
Hmm.
adjustment for folks like in commercial real estate and things like that too. We're seeing those kind of adjustments at large, and that kind of ripples through everything. But I think that's something that's very much unfolding.
Amazing. I mean, it's a very exciting time for the kind of smaller hybrid office model.
That's right.
There's so much agility here.
Yeah.
Um, and there is actually, we're starting to see this kind of these massive talent pools opening up. Very different from how we the kind of premise that we were starting with at the outset of the conversation of this exodus of talent, and actually it's kind of
Shifting.
quite the opposite.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's very
quite,
rarely
quite
one. Yeah, it's never in like just one direction anymore, right? It's almost a fluid connection of these different factors. That's why, I mean, I love the
hmm.
data myself. This is why it's so fascinating to look at the analysis from different perspectives. I think you really have
Hmm.
to, you know, lean into that again, not to look at what's happened in the past, but to prepare for trends that are coming. How can you best lean into where we're headed? And we have a great perspective. We get to work with some of the very large organizations, and then also some of the very small and niche and leading edge. And it's all pros and cons. I mean, the Goliaths of the industry have massive resources and can test things in a way that it's not available to the more entrepreneurial teams. But they look at the small focus teams and say, I wish we had that focus. I wish we had that streamlining of decision making. I mean, I have to go through 50 miles of red tape to be an intrapreneur. Um, so it's
Yeah,
playing to your strengths. And I'll go back to that core, the question you asked, like what would I do to solve this? It's starting with the listening. What's going to be right for your organization?
do you have any advice on like how that listening process actually takes place? Like,
Great
is it a
question.
series? Are we talking like a series of surveys or actual conversations that need to be facilitated?
That's a great question, Ryan. I actually towards the end of last year, we work with Qualtrics SAP. It's like the big survey instrument data collection tool. If you get surveys from Apple or what have
Mm,
you, this is the back end of that. They don't have a
right.
lot of their client base that is B2B and even smaller percentage in professional services. So we work closely with them because we have different requirements. It is more people, the workforce very tied to the products that we're selling. I mean, the teams are actually the solution that buyers are looking for. So one of the things that I noticed, looking at kind of even my history in B2C, B2B, and then professional services, I mean, the rest of the world has super sophisticated data modeling, real-time dashboards. You talk about AI, sentiment grading, those types of things at scale. It shapes our lives. Like whether you know it or not, it's
Yep.
shaping our lives socially, personally, business wise. Professional services has been slow to adapt, but we think it's going to pick up very quickly. And to your question around the channels, it is not just surveys. Professional and well designed survey instruments, absolutely a part of any type of um, impactful research program. And taking advantage of the more advanced technologies to do things like I can hit an app and just record a short snippet of what I'm experiencing at the time. Think about internal teams, like, as a woman engineer, I feel isolated. When I'm working on this project, I don't know who to go to. I keep sharing this, what I think are very valid concerns, and I'm being dismissed. That might not fall into a structured survey, right? But if there's an outlet where
Yeah.
I can get that heard, that's an important listening post, right? And the tools, I think, have shifted. We'll go back to like the generational differences, the comfort with these different methods of listening, both kind of prescriptive and active or passive in nature. They all have a place. I mean, some of that, I said on one side of my mouth, big data and monitoring and all these things can be misused and reinforce mistrust. When they are transparent and when they are used responsibly, they can also be an incredibly powerful passive listening tool. We're not hiding this,
Yeah.
but we can see that most people are disengaged in these meetings. What can we do to make that better, right? Here are the kinds of tools we're using. Here's what we're seeing. Is this right? We can have that conversation. It can inform conversations, not in a mistrustful way, but in an open way that we might not see in a one-to-one. It gives it an opportunity to work as a more holistic team. And you think about, see, all these topics connect. You think about what we were talking about, geography. Those types of passive listening tools are even more important in that kind of context. I'll use
Yeah.
myself. I can't go sit on someone's little side table anymore. I'm chatting, I'm, finding folks, what have you. Those informal communications. What does that tell us, right? How much is happening outside the regular structure? Those types of things. That's important to understand and share, and can sometimes really help build trust if it's used in an open manner.
Well, that's very interesting. The idea of, I remember being a young architect, and the kind of excitement that I would get from leaving my team that I was working with, and I worked at RSHP, Richard Rogers practice in London.
Yeah.
Fairly large practice, maybe 150 people at the time, and the excitement that would happen from being able to leave my team, go and stand next to another team, ask questions,
Absolutely.
just have a look at what it is they're doing, attend some of their crits, go and speak with the communications teams. So, being able to, it's not just for these tools are not just for the employers to be spying
That's
on
right.
employees, but actually they become a tool to kind of reveal parts of the business to other parts of the business to itself, and
Absolutely.
that becomes great.
Absolutely. And when you cut it more finely, because our research, we look at AEC as a vertical itself, like that's one cohort, but architecture, engineering, construction, and the different, even public and private architecture as a discipline tends to lean more into qualitative research, which is a real value, right? So thinking
Yeah.
about our business, understanding our clients' needs, demands, and even what the marketplace is leaning towards, we see that very heavily in the architecture space. And so if we're able to take that and lever it more internally to our own requirements, or even the audiences that we need to be speaking to, there's a good foundation to build upon there. In engineering space, it's a little different. I think that's, the appeal is more operational. It's more logistics, it's more engineered, right? You can see this data and then take action. It's a different type of research affinity, but that's a different foundation to build on. Construction somewhere a little bit in the middle. So, but they're, of the
Yeah.
three, it's the lowest, kind of affinity for research in general. They tend to look more at operational data than anything else. kind of leading edge, they may have practices that are informed by architecture engineering that are helping them kind of change that practice.
Amazing. I think this is such a fascinating area of conversation, and actually it has a very big impact on a kind of modern leadership. And there's overarching here. There is what you're kind of the research is pointing to, and what you're sharing is that we are in need of a new kind of leadership, right? One which is much more based on a kind of tactical deployment of empathy and listening and transparency and actually understanding what is going on for the people that you're working with, being skilled in being able to facilitate that kind of conversation, creating a space where people feel safe. I love this idea of,
Yeah.
you know, some of the surveys that I might read that practice owners will send out to their employees. They're very closed questions. They're yes, no's, and they look like they've been written by, you know, an HR department to protect the employer,
Yeah. It's not
as opposed to actually finding out what, you know, what's going on for the team members. Because sometimes the team, you don't, you know, you're only going to get the information based on the quality of the questions.
Yeah. It's biased, and actually sending that, what you're describing, Ryan, that sends a message in itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's almost sending a message of like we're doing a tick box exercise
That's
here.
right.
We don't really care.
That's right. Yeah.
That's the message. Yeah. It's we don't really care.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for all the generations, it's not that a more experienced or a tenured leader that grew up in a more, you know, analog environment is any less valuable than someone that's coming up with all of this technology, but it is a call to adapt. Both are very valuable. I mean, I'll share our own partner structure. We have multi-generational input, you know, from advisory, technology, all these different areas. Being able to have that conversation and perspective as leadership is important too. And you talk about grappling with this technology. I think we've seen a trend for, you know, marketing and growth strategy to get a more visible seat at the table, if you will. You know, in architecture, it's often blended. But you think about the decisions you have to make with, and Ryan, that was a great way to kind of bring together a lot of those threads. You think about the group you need to really make an educated decision on those things. It's inherently cross-functional. There's legal and IP considerations. There's technology. There's people, soft, social, emotional. You have to have a team that's equipped. I think the leadership, it's not just one, just like, you know, marketing and branding activity is no longer like a haymaker. It's a team sport. Leadership is also a collaborative sport.
Brilliant. I think that's the perfect place to conclude the conversation there, Karl. That leadership is a team sport.
It's absolutely.
So, really very much enjoyed our conversation, and thank you very much for coming in and sharing your expertise. If people want to find out more and kind of go deeper into some of the studies that Hinge produces and the kind of services that Hinge produce, what would you recommend?
Oh, go to our website, hingemarketing.com. There is a lot of material on there. You'll learn about more about how we think, and we do have a mission to share a lot of what we learn with the industries we serve, so that we hear back. You know, it's our way of understanding these trends that we've been talking about, and we'd love you to get involved. And, you know, as the other side of that, we share quite a bit of what we learn. So definitely do check out our website. Lots of good info on there.
Amazing. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Karl.
Thanks, Ryan. That was a great conversation.
And that's a wrap. And don't forget, if you want to access your free training to learn how to structure your firm or practice for freedom, fulfillment, and profit, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. Or if you'd like to speak to one of our advisors directly, follow the link in the information. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you be unstoppable.